Hey guys, it is Saturday. It is 10:18 a.m. and I am going to make a web application. So I'm doing a talk this upcoming Tuesday at One North Interactive, and it's going to be about MVC and comparing it to other design patterns such as an MVU, which is basically uh, how you're going to maintain your state on the front end. So I wanted to create a site that simply rendered content or rendered data server side as opposed to rendering the view, because as modern web applications grow, we start to get problems with their state and how we're going to maintain that. So hopefully today I'll be able to get a simple lawyer landing page going. We can extend that functionality with a search, maybe with a filter, and we can see how all that will be done using Vue.js as our front end framework and using NodeJS as our back end with Express as our library for that. So let's get started. I haven't done anything. I'm going to make a directory in my command line for this project. So One North demo, I guess. Hop into that folder, and we're gonna create this from scratch. You guys are here for the git init. I'm just gonna create a git repo so I can save my data, and if I make a mistake, I can roll back. Every time I do this, I also like to create a git ignore file for things that I know that I don't want to be included in the project. So I'm gonna use Vim because I'm a hipster that uses Vim on the weekends. And I'm just going to ignore Node modules because that folder will be generated by Node, and we'll see that in a bit, and I don't want all those modules to be pushed up. So if we take a look at what I just created, hopefully, there we go. So that's the contents of that file, just as Node modules. Cool. And oops, looks like I don't know how to use the command line. So this is all we've got. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create that npm package so that we can start getting our server writ. So this is the npm command to create a new package. The name, it's going to default to One North Demo. It sounds good. Version 1, yep. Description, demo, MVC, MVU, hybrid approach. So MVC is great, and I think that it still should be used for server side for routing, and we'll take a look at how we're going to do that next. But it kind of leaves you on the client side without that structure. Once that view is rendered, you're out of luck, and it's up to you to use JavaScript on the front end, whether that's jQuery or AngularJS or pure JavaScript or another library like Vue. It's kind of rough to maintain state when it gets complicated. So I've got the Atom text editor, no more Vim. We're basically going to open that up. And here we are. And you can see these are the files that Git generated, and this is the file that npm generated. I apologize if you guys are familiar with npm and Git. It might be a little bit dry, but just in case people have been using other web development technologies, I don't want to start doing all this crazy stuff without any information. Hey, this will make me feel good about myself. In case you guys didn't know, my name is Ryan. Hello. Great. I've got some JSON and some JavaScript formatting, so you saw all those lines tab over. Great. So let's install our first dependency. So I'm going to be using the Express framework. So basically, Express is going to allow me to easily create an app, a web app that I can manage the routing for. So I'm running npm install Express to install the Express package, and then I'm going to type --save here to save that to my package JSON. We're going to see some dependencies show up. And that way when I push it to the repository and you guys download it, you'll be able to just run npm install, and it'll look through these dependencies to know that, hey, this program is going to need Express in order to run correctly. So it's kind of the creepiest command I think I've ever seen, but this is just going to create an index.js file, which will be our app, our application. So I've created that here. And now I'm going to just create a simple Express app, and we'll see if it works. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab the Express package using require and saying the name of the npm module that I want to require, which is Express. I'm next going to create an instance of Express that I'm going to call app. So Express is a function, and then I use these, this to call that function, and whatever that returns is going to be my app. So right off the bat, I could just say app.listen. That'll run my server on port 3000. And then when that's ready, it's going to call this function. And we're just going to print out web app ready at port 3000. Exclamation points so that people get really excited. It's important to excite everyone when they see that app is running. So let's switch over, and to run this app I can just do node index.js, and hopefully we'll get that message, which means that our app, our Express, got loaded correctly, app got loaded correctly. It started to listen, and that was successful, so now our app is going to be running on port 3000. So let's hop over to Chrome. And this morning I started to look at the strategy. So you'll see some Pug documentation here, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. But basically, this is our web app. It's running right now. It says cannot get slash, and we're gonna have to implement our routing and our endpoints. So let's do that right now. So our server is up. If I were to kill that and try that again, you'd see that the sites can't be reached. There's no server running on that port. So what the browser was yelling at us about, or it was Express saying I can't get at that slash endpoint. It's because we didn't define our routes. So let's define that slash route right here. Basically, the way you're going to define a Express route is you're going to give it the name of the route, so basically the URL pattern that you want to go to, and then what do I do at that URL pattern. So rec is the request object, and res is the response object. So usually what you'll end up doing is you'll be reading from the request object to get information, maybe about the URL, like what parameters are in it, but also you can pass information about the host, just various stuff. We won't be using rec for this basic version, but it's gonna be coming up. It'll be coming up later for sure. And then this is a response object that we basically use to send responses. So the way we do that is we say res.send, and then we send our responses. So hello from app. So hopefully when this application loads, it's gonna import Express, start up our app, and then it's gonna register this slash route with all GET requests. And as a response, it'll send out just this simple text, hello from app. So if we rerun this script, we're going to be able to go to that URL and see our response. Web app ready at port 3000, great. So I'm gonna hit this, hello from app, perfect. So all that happened was it looked at that route slash, and it sent this as a response. But if I went to something else that I didn't have as a registered route, like lawyers, cannot get lawyers. So there's no route registered with that. We can take a look at routes later. So right now, just to do a really simple, basic outline of the structure. This will be the home page. So if people go here right now, we'll just print out the word home page. This will be our developer's landing page. And then Express allows you to, let's do res.send. Developers. Express allows you to use this syntax to specify dynamic traits, and I'll show you what that syntax is in a second. If I do developers and then I say developer ID, this here is going to be dynamic. And what I mean by that is whenever I use this colon, I'm going to be able to put in /developers/Ryan, /developer/Eric, and it will see this as the route to handle those requests with. So let's do that. And I'm just going to print out the developer ID. And earlier I mentioned we're going to be able to get information off this request object that's going to have information about the value for this. So I could be mistaken, but I believe that information is going to be stored on the params object, and then it'll just have the name of the field that we're looking for. So here, instead of just printing out developers, I'll say developer, and I'll give the name there. So this is JavaScript ES6 templating syntax that basically allows us to insert a variable in here instead of just print out the word. So developer will be printed out, but here we should get whatever came after developers in this route. But I am no genius, so there's a pretty good chance that this will crash. But assuming that it doesn't, when we rerun our application, we should be able to check out those different routes. So let's hop over to Chrome. Let us go to 3000. We get our homepage response. And I'm going to kind of do this so we can follow along in the code. I got this MacBook probably a few months ago, and I'm still trying to figure out how to do the things that I love, like snapping things to the left, and I just don't think it's possible. But the point is, we've got these routes here, so we go to / and we'll see the response should be homepage. If we go to /developers, you should expect to see developers as the response, right? Because we said that's how we'd handle that. And then finally, this developers with this dynamic value. Let's see if I broke it. Great. So what it did here is it said, let's grab anything here. Let's throw that on this params object. We grab that ID off of that. Right now the ID is just a name. And we're just printing out developer and then the name of the guy. So if the ID changed to Eric, it would be Eric. If it changed to Olivia, then you'd have developer Olivia. Olivia's not a developer though. Emma is a developer, so that would probably make more sense. So great. So right here we've set up the routing. These are kind of like the controllers that we see in MVC, where it can look at the context. So if we're coming in from /, do the following. If we're coming in from /developers, do this. And if we're coming in from a specific developer page, we can even grab information about that URL and use that in our page. So great. So we did it. Hooray. We're geniuses. Let's move on to rendering actual HTML. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to pretend that I know what pug is. I don't. So the first thing I did for this demo was I looked up using templating engines for Express. Basically, a template engine is going to allow me to insert these dynamic properties like developer ID into the server and render real HTML for the user and display that in the page. So it'll allow me to insert developer ID, and if I have information associated with that developer ID, I'd be able to insert that as well. So before we really dive in and get to the complexity of that, I just want to show you how we can use this developer ID to get real data. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to define a few developers. Just kind of right here, we'll make a function that says developer get developer by ID, and we'll pass in that developer ID. And so this is a function we haven't created yet, so let's go ahead and create that function. I'm just going to put it all in one file for now. And that will be function get developer by ID. It expects an ID. And this is how we're going to handle that logic. So we get an ID. So in this case, it was Emma, and earlier it was Ryan. We're basically just going to look at our data structure and return a developer object that matches that ID. So this should be pretty straightforward. I'm just going to locally define this developers list, which will basically be indexed by ID. So if they see Ryan, they should get this data back. His name is Ryan Haskell Glatz. His age is anonymous. We're not going to do age. Let's see. His favorite language is Elm. And his gender is male. So there's just some stupid data that probably no one is interested in. But we're gonna do that again just for Eric. Name. This is the moment of truth. If you're Eric Karen or Eric Theme, which one is it going to be? Oh, looks like it's going to be Karen. His favorite language is definitely also Elm. That is all that matters. Elm is a reactive functional programming language that everyone enjoys, especially Eric. And Emma, I know her favorite language of all time is definitely going to have to be. That's a good question. I want to say Elm, but I feel like that would be really boring data if everyone's favorite language was Elm. I think her favorite language is going to be C#. There you go, Emma. Enjoy it. And you are not a male, so congratulations. So this is just basically a simple data structure developers. And I'm going to grab a developer off of that data structure with the ID that comes in. Developers at ID, and if developer is undefined, so basically if I couldn't find it in that structure above, I'm going to return just an empty developer. Name will just be blank. Favorite language will just be blank. And gender will just be blank. Great. And then if we do get that developer, we're going to return that empty developer in the case that we didn't get a result. And if we do get a developer, we're going to return that instead. And that'll give us some type safety. So we'll know that no matter what comes out of this function, it's going to be an object that's going to have a name, a favorite language, and a gender. If those things are empty strings, then we're just going to render nothing. Maybe for the purpose of the demo, we'll create a default user. Nobody, his favorite language is nothing, and his gender is neither. But other than that, if I give a valid ID, a match in the database, when I say database, I just mean this simple structure. If we get a match, we're going to hopefully return that developer here, and then we'll be able to render that developer's information. So instead of saying the ID that came in, we can grab that name, and let's see how that works. So you'll see that every time I redo this, I have to kill this web application, and I have to restart it. I might get annoyed with that, and I might have to upgrade that functionality. But here we go. I typed in developers/Emma, and we got the name property off of the developer because that's what we were interested in printing out here. So if I did Eric, I'd get Eric. If I did Ryan, I'd get Ryan. So this is a big step. We're able to take that URL. We're able to generate a object off of that URL, and using that object, we'll be able to generate the content that's going to be necessary for our web page. Let me kind of take this developers bit here, and I'm going to put this into another function. Get all developers, and I'm just going to be throwing functions all in this one class. It's probably not too great for structure, but that's not going to need any parameters, and we're just going to return that object. Okay, so the code should still work the same, but you never know because JavaScript will not yell at you until it crashes in production. But basically, developers will get this list like we got it before. We'll grab a developer by ID, and then if it's undefined, we'll spit out this fake developer. We didn't test that, did we? I'm going to type in garbage, and we see that the name nobody is going to be pulled. So everything's working as expected, which is great. The reason I pulled over get all developers is because I'm going to want to make developers a little bit more interesting of an endpoint. So developers equals get all developers. I'm going to call that function, and the result will be some array. I'm just going to print out that array, which will kind of look gross. We can format that hopefully later. But one thing that's going to drive me nuts is I'm going to make a code change, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to be like, why is nothing different? And it's because the same instance of the server back when I ran it earlier is going to be running. And that's going to drive me insane. So I'm going to do something right now that's going to help me never have to come back to this terminal again to restart my server on a code change. And I'm going to install a node package called NodeMon or NodeDaemon, whatever you're into. And that's going to be a developer dependency. This isn't going to need to run in production. This is just a convenient thing for me locally. And basically what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to be able to listen for file changes and restart my server every time I detect a change. And it's pretty easy to use that. You can see that the package installed, and if we take a look at our package.json, a new entry was created for dev dependencies for NodeMon. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this NodeMon command. This is the shady way of doing it, where I basically find the script, and I just say what is the server that I'm gonna need to execute every time I detect a file change, and that's going to be our index.js file. So it's watching everything, and it's just started node index.js, and we had web app ready at port 3000. So when I go to developers, hopefully we'll get that array. Neat. So you could probably tell that this is not what I wanted to happen, and the reason that did happen was because I was not using the template syntax. If you notice the difference between this code here, this little backtick, as opposed to the single quote, that'll allow me to have variables inside of my JavaScript. So hopefully when I save, notice I'm gonna be able to refresh here, and I'm gonna get my object back, which is also not that beautiful to look at. But you'll see that the server is automatically restarting for me. It detected restarted due to changes and relaunched node.js. So let's print out something a little more interesting. So I get developers. I can get all the developer names by doing a simple mapping function. Basically, it's going to loop through all the developers, and it's going to just return to me a list of their names. So developers.map, I'll give it a function that'll be called for each developer. So here, let me actually first do this. just to be safe. This will get me all the keys, basically all the IDs here. This will give me a list of those first for this data structure. So I'm not dealing with an array here, I'm dealing with an object. This will turn this into an array of keys, essentially. And then for this, I will iterate through all these developer IDs. So basically for each ID that comes in here, that'll be a different developer. I will return developers with that ID, and I'll just grab their name property. And so hopefully this will be a list of all developer names. And if we print that out, we should be able to see that right there. Developer names, start, and we get this, right? We get a list of them. This is just default how it's going to render an array, but if we wanted to put spaces in between, we could do that. We would just create a developer name string, which took all those developer names and it pretty much joins them together with a comma and a space. So it'll put a comma and a space in between everything we do. So if we print that out, we'll see that there's a space there. We can change that. We can say and is what we want to print out, and you can see that all it's doing is it's joining that data structure, those developer names, with that comma or with that and. So cool. So I go to developers, I can do that. I go to developer/Eric, I get Eric Karen. I go developer/Bob, and I should get nobody because there were no results found. Hopefully we'll be able to have some error handling when people go to a developer detail page for a developer that doesn't exist, or they go to an invalid URL. But that's all something we can worry about in the future. So let's start taking all this code and let's start moving it into a place where we can manage it. So you see here, all that this is a function. What I can start to do is I can start to create these folders that are going to store my I can either do models, views, controllers, but that pattern is generally, as applications scale, it can kind of get gross, especially if I'm trying to work on a lot of homepage features. I don't want to go to the homepage model in one folder and go into the views folder for the homepage view and go in the controllers folder for the homepage controller. So I'm just going to make a homepage folder at the root, and I'm going to make a new file that's basically just going to be the controller, which will return this here. And then this will be where I'm going to take all that function, and I'm going to export that function. Oops. So we'll get that out of there for now. Inside of my controller, I'm going to say module exports. This is basically what's it going to return when someone requires this. So it'll just export this function that sends this home page. So I'll save that. Here I'm going to have a few more dependencies. So I'll say homepage equals require homepage/controller. And for now I'll call that homepage controller, but in a little bit we're gonna update that. So homepage controller will basically be that function that we had before, because what's going to happen if my terminal doesn't crash, and it does because it can't find module homepage/controller, that's because I used the wrong require syntax. Basically, if you want to require something that's not in node modules, you specify, hey, I'm in my current directory, and then I want you to go to the home page, and I want you to get the controller file. So hopefully this one will work. Great, so that one didn't crash on us. So if I go to the home page, I should see the same thing. And if I change the controller to say new home page, just to prove to you that that changing this file will change this view, you'll see that change went through. So if you aren't familiar with how require works, basically what we're doing here is we're requiring this homepage controller file. Every file that can be required, just like Express, is going to have this module.exports section that's going to basically describe, hey, what should I return when someone requires me? So in this case, we return that function. So this function here is exactly what it's going to get. That's what homepage controller is going to be. It's going to be that function, and we're just going to insert that function here. Way I can tidy this up is I can start to make new things for views and models. I can put that all in that homepage folder. But instead of having to require homepage controller, homepage view, and all that, I can require an index file. So an index file will allow me to export an object that has properties. And I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. A lot of words right now, but not a lot of examples. So let's hop to that. And let's do module.exports to describe what we're going to return when someone accesses index.js. We're going to return an object that's going to have a controller. And that controller is basically going to be this file. So relative to the index, we're in this directory and we want to get the controller.js, or we don't need to specify JS. So here, I can access this object by this property. So I'll show you. Let's see if it crashed before I describe what I did. Everything's working. Basically, I'm going to require this home page, and that defaults to index. So if I don't say this, Node's going to assume that if I give it a folder, that there's going to be a file in there that's called index.js. That's going to be the default. So basically, require./homepage is going to go into this homepage folder. It's going to say, okay, find an index.js file. It's going to find this guy here, and it's going to return this object that has one property called controller. The value of that property is determined on what this controller.js file is going to spit out, and that's going to spit out a function. So this will return a function here. So I'll have controller, which is a function, and then this will have an object that has a controller property, and that controller property is that function that we've been using. So when I refresh, everything's the same. And once again, if I change this back to homepage, we should see that kind of change. And that's just the basic how Node.js require works. So there's nothing too complicated with that. So we can do this for all of our files here. I can make a developers landing folder, and I can make a developers detail folder. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to require folders that don't exist yet, but we're going to create those. And I like to use slug case for my naming convention. I think it's pretty easy to read when you're browsing through the file system. So you'll see dashes some places, and you'll see capital letters for JavaScript objects, and it might be a little bit confusing, but I think we'll be okay. So here I'm just requiring all these modules. It's a little bit tedious, but hopefully with the structure we'll be able to just kind of stay in our folder, our homepage folder, or our developers detail folder, and we'll be able to get some real work done. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be lazy, and I'm going to create a new terminal inside of code OneNorth demo, and I'm going to I copy this homepage folder, and I'm going to call it developer landing. Is that what I call it? Developers landing. And it's a recursive copy, so that just means it's a folder. So here I have the developers landing. You can see that here. I'm going to do the same thing for developers detail, because it's pretty much going to have the same structure. So we should see these are the folders, and even here we'll see that. So right now this is the homepage function. But the index is going to be the same. We're always going to want to require the controller relative, and the same for developer detail. So let's take that code that we had before. Let's grab it. Let's move it out of here, and let's use the developer's landing page controller. All right. So before I forget to paste that, I'm going to come back over here, and we're going to use that function. we're going to have to address the fact that get all developers isn't defined in this context, and we'll do that in a bit. And that's that. And then for index.js, we're going to have to grab this function too. We're going to grab it for the details page. So we can say developers detail.controller. And hopefully at the end of this, everything will be working as we expect. But that's not how coding works all the time, and that's not a big deal. So we've exported this. Get developers by ID is going to call that function. So basically, it's going to require that these functions are defined. So we should probably take this code also and put it in a shared place. I'm just going to make a really stupid simple file that's going to be a developer's helper file, and then I'm going to kind of pass that in, or I'm going to require that on the different pages. So hopefully the app's going to blow up if I save now, but let's create one more folder, and that's going to be helpers, which is just like naming your folders, models, views, and controllers. That can get out of hand pretty fast, but we're going to just going to kind of hack our way through this. So developers is going to be the name of the file. This will be a JavaScript file that's going to export just a simple object that's going to have all those functions that we're going to depend on. So here, instead of putting that like this, we'll basically define properties on this object that will return functions. So let's get rid of these semicolons where they don't belong. Oops, I was confused about which one I copied and which one I pasted. Whew, something crazy is happening. There we go. So this is going to return an object that will have two properties. One property is going to be this getDeveloperById function, and the other property is going to be getAllDevelopers. So that should be pretty straightforward. But now inside of our controllers, for simplicity, I'm just going to say developers helper. I don't like that. Yeah, I'm gonna have to call it something like that. And I'm gonna require that file. So we're using relative paths still, which is kind of annoying. So I'm gonna have to get out of the developers landing folder by going ... That'll bring me to the OneNorth demo level, and then I'll dive into the helpers folder, and then I'll dive into that developers.js file, and that should return to me that object that we built here. So that's that. And then instead of calling getAllDevelopers, I'm going to call developers helper dot getAllDevelopers. And I think that's the only function that I'm going to be using here. And I'm going to do the same thing for developers detail, because we don't have access to this getDeveloperById function. So we're going to do developers helper dot getDeveloperById. Sweet. So let's take a look at our output and see if we broke anything. Oh wow, it works. It's always worked, that's got to be wrong. So here we have this. Oh no, it would always work because we never actually called the function, so it didn't actually crash. But basically, right here, it's pretty easy to see what's going on. We can see these are the modules that we're requiring. We can see that on this route, we're going to use the home pages controller. On this developers route, we use the landing controller and the detail controller. And let's see what goes wrong. I'm going to keep this terminal here for comedic relief, because if it does crash, it's going to be nasty. Oh wow, it worked. That's not like me. I usually mess up. Oh my goodness. Thank you. Oh wow, that was scary. Usually when things are going well, something's messed up. Okay, so this is a good error that we're getting here. I know where that's coming from. There is basically inside of our helper, developer ID is calling getAllDevelopers, which isn't in the scope. It's not a global variable. But since it's working off the same object, we can use the this parameter, and hopefully this will say, hey, get the developer's thing that's attached to my object. This in JavaScript is not always the most straightforward thing, but hopefully in this case it'll work out the way we expect it to. And sure enough, it does. With JavaScript, the way you can think of this is whoever called the function, it's the thing to the left of the dot. So basically this, in the getDeveloperById context, depends on who's calling it. So this controller here has this developer's helper object that calls developer.id. So developer's helper is the this. And so if I were to say developer's helper.get all developers, it would call the correct function. And we see that works in the landing page. Cool. So we've got our routing figured out. Our controllers are doing great. They're able to read the URLs, and they're able to generate the appropriate thing. So now we're going to get into the web development part where you watch me struggle with Pug. Pug is a templating language, and the main reason that I'm using it actually is for this feature here. It's going to allow me to define a common layout and kind of insert various blocks. So there's scripts, there's content, there's footer. We'll take a look at how that works in a bit. But I have never used Pug before, but it looks incredibly straightforward, and I'm kind of hyped. They have a pretty good installation tutorial, and they give you some good examples. Pug's going to make HTML less gross, and the reason I used it was I said, okay, I want to use a templating engine with Express. Let's take a look at the available templating engines. And the first thing they said was Pug. That was a pretty good sign. But when I followed this link that compared it, it kind of really said Pug was great. And after looking at it, I agree with that. Jade has been renamed to Pug. So if I open this, you'll see that I'm taken to Pug. So if you guys are familiar with Jade, that's what this is too. So great. So let's start making some templates. And I'm really hyped that we created these folders because now we'll know exactly where these templates are going to go. So I think the first place that I would want to make a template is this developers thing. I think this is the grossest and it needs the most attention. So let's get started and let's install Pug. I'm gonna cut this video out because it is boring.